It's the Guy Benson Show. Thank you for listening. I'm Guy Benson. We are live in the D.C. area doing the show from home, which has its, I guess, its advantages, but also disadvantages. Dana Perino, my guest earlier in the hour, mentioned a few of those. And if you missed it, please go to GuyBensonShow.com, subscribe to the podcast, which you should be doing anyway. It's free. Joining me now on the line is Congressman Adam Kinzinger, a Republican from the 16th District of Illinois. Congressman, great to have you back.
Hey, thanks. Good to be with you. Wish better circumstances, but good to be with you nonetheless.
Likewise. And how are you hanging in there? I mean, it's a weird time for everyone. It's got to be extra weird to be someone with, like, power and important votes coming up in a time of crisis.
Yeah, you know, it is. And obviously it makes our job all the more important from, you know, obviously votes and writing policy, but also staying in touch with people. You know, we're the lifeline between a lot of folks getting the help they need in the federal government. And so, yeah, you know, everybody's teleworking too, which is weird, but it's been pulled off fairly well so far.
96-0 in the Senate last night. I have some problems with the bill. I would have done some things differently, but I supported its passage. That's where I'm coming from. What are your thoughts on that legislation as it comes toward the House?
Yeah, I think it's the same. I mean, look, if, you know, elections have consequences, we don't own the House. But I think, given the fact that we don't have the House, given Nancy Pelosi's ridiculous power play at the last minute, they weren't able to move the goalpost at all, maybe on a couple of minor things. But it was a victory, I would say, for Republicans. Yeah, a victory for the American people, but not something we should celebrate too much because, again, it's, you know, $2 trillion is not being paid for. But this is a moment where, you know, I equate it to if you're a household in debt and your roof is about to cave in and you got to take a credit card to fix it, you're going to do that because the consequences of not are going to be, you know, devastating. And so it stinks to have to do that. And when this shakes out and the economy comes back, we have to talk about debt and deficit. But this is a good move for now, and hopefully we can reopen the economy, at least in pieces, soon.
Congressman, I've got one of your colleagues from the other side of the aisle, Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey. He'll be on the show later. And I'm eager to ask him about this as well, because I saw Steny Hoyer today give a statement about the voting tomorrow. I had Leader McCarthy on yesterday on this show, asked him about it. It sounds like they're going to do a voice vote tomorrow and pass it basically unanimously, because you guys aren't in town. You guys are all over the country right now. You're back in Chicagoland. And look, I get fully the urgency of this. I'm furious that it took 3 days of filibustering and delays to get to this point. But I also just fundamentally am offended by the idea of a $2.2 trillion behemoth, even though I support it and it's needed, not actually getting a roll call vote where every person has to stand up and be counted because of this system that we currently have where you can't vote remotely. Many people can't get back to D.C. in time. And it seems, I don't know, there's something about it. And I know extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, but just the precedent that it could set that could potentially be abused in the future, it doesn't sit well with me. I don't know if there's an alternative. If you could just reflect on that current reality, that'd be great.
Yeah, you know, the problem is, you did say it, it's unprecedented times. It's something we haven't faced in a while, where we failed as two areas. Number one, they left the Capitol open, you know, to visitors and fly-ins for weeks after we were saying you need to close that to keep the virus from spreading here. Secondly, you know, after 9/11, we should have created some emergency way to remote vote. The fact that we don't have that is ridiculous. But the problem we're facing now is there's a lot of members, and, you know, I'm in quarantine right now until at least Sunday or Monday. There's a lot of members that simply cannot get there because we're in quarantine. There are a lot of members, I believe, quite honestly, that have symptoms of the virus that either don't believe they have it, haven't been tested, that are going to make this journey. And so the difficulty is, you know, to what extent do we also have a responsibility not to spread this around? You're going to have members in Washington State, you know, hop on airplanes to get here. By the way, members in New York, even though constitutionally they don't have to follow the quarantine because you can't be denied, you know, going to vote, but it's 14 days. And so that's the situation we're in. So I think if this
actually, can I just jump in? I just want to jump in because that reminded me of something that I meant to mention earlier. Last night I was up watching the voting on the Senate floor, both for the amendment and then the final passage, and I was sort of astonished that there was basically no social distancing happening on the floor of the Senate. They were all mingling around and hanging out in their little clusters and chatting and yucking it up and putting hands on shoulders and stuff. And I know that's how it always works in the Senate, but I'm like, you guys, many of you are over 70 years old. You're telling everyone we have to do these things. We're all watching you voting on this giant thing because of a pandemic, and the basic steps to prevent the pandemic are not being followed by U.S. senators from both parties on live national television. I mean, what is an average American supposed to think about that?
Well, I agree with you. And that's the thing is a lot of members will be like, we're not going to go anywhere. We're going to face this because we're tough. And it's kind of this, I'm going to run into the trench and get my hero moment. The problem is, I don't think they realize, some of them don't realize that this is really a threat, especially to older Americans. But it's not even just a threat to us. If you're willing to, give your life to vote, that's great. But the problem is you can spread this to many other people, and that's the one person can spread to thousands through that multiplication effort. So, hopefully, so this is what we're going to do. We initially Pelosi wanted to do this on a unanimous consent. Obviously, that was dumb. So we're going to hopefully do it on a voice vote. Those of us that can't make it, we'll still put in the record how we would have voted. I'll be a yes, and people will be able to go and still express their anger on the floor if they don't like it or their support. And but if they do force a roll call vote, then we'll have 24 to 48 hours to get to D.C. It'll be a low turnout. They just need to have 218 people to make it legal. But we'll go that way. But I'll be very clear. If I can't make it because of my quarantine, then I'll say, yes, I would have voted yes, and you can judge me accordingly.
Adam Kinzinger from Illinois, a Republican, my guest on the Guy Benson Show. I want to play you two sound bites, both from Governor Cuomo of New York. A lot of people are giving President Trump a hard time. I actually find it very revealing, and I'll have a monologue coming up in the next hour about the media. I find it revealing when President Trump and Governor Cuomo say very similar things, or at least explore very similar ideas, and the press piles on President Trump for being reckless and irresponsible and false hope and all of that. When it's Trump, when it's Cuomo, they're all, gushing over him. And I think he's doing a very, very good job. I'm not saying he's not, but they're in some cases saying almost the exact same things or floating some of the exact same ideas. And the reaction is polarized in the media, I think, for bias-related reasons. Setting that aside, the reason I gave that preamble was what clearly President Trump is trying to do, and what many other officials are trying to figure out, is when would it be safe to start to slowly but surely transition back to something approaching normal and sending people back to work so we're not just shut down indefinitely. And I'm not advocating for any timeline. I'm not an expert. I'm just saying it's not going to last for months. It's just not the current status quo. So here's what Cuomo had to say about that. First cut 13.
The biggest number, when this is done and we can actually go back and test, the biggest number is going to be people who had it, who resolved, who never knew they had it. That's going to be the biggest number. And the reason we want to get to that test is because then when you talk about restarting the economy, you have a test that says you, Andrew, were exposed to it in February, and by the way, you are recovered and you have the antibodies, go back to work.
The antibodies being key. Here's cut 14. He continues that thought.
Younger people have less risk. People who had the virus and are resolved have less risk. Start that economy by bringing in those recovered people, those younger people who are less at risk, and start moving that machine that way. Start restarting the economy that way, which is also the best public health strategy, right? So there is a path that refines the public health strategy and starts growing the economy.
So, Congressman, I listened to that. I don't think it should be taboo to talk about phase two. I don't think we should be reckless about how we get to phase two, but talking about it makes sense. I wonder what your reaction is to what you just heard.
Yeah, I mean, look, the governor's right and the president's right, and they're saying the same thing. But you're right; they're treated very differently. So it amazes me how many mainstream media now have a PhD in pandemology and they're experts in what should happen. The reality is that is our biggest hope, is to get that antibody test. And then if I had it, I can, go back to work without fear of spreading it. But if they just want to shut this economy down for 18 months, I mean, my goodness, it's even their utopian dream can never even exist in that condition. So they're absolutely both right in what they're saying. We're going to do this cautiously. We're going to do this at the correct moment. But look, all you have to do is know that the political movements are being played in this because, the whole idea of you can't accuse China of anything here. I remember I did a tweet that just said, daily reminder, you're in your home right now because #China hid the virus. A very factual statement. I never look at Twitter replies, but I did on this one. And I was called everything from basically the Grand Wizard of the KKK on. And I asked people, so what's the difference between when I attacked Turkey for hitting the Kurds or I attacked Russia for campaign meddling? Does that mean that, I'm racist against Russian Americans? Of course not. We have to, and especially as members of Congress that are on the Foreign Affairs Committee, be able to have a real discussion about the fact that China hid the fact that this virus existed for 45 days. And one study said that 95% of people that are going to be infected by this would not have been infected had China just been honest. And, it's a real concern. Did China not say anything because they wanted the rest of the world to suffer so that relatively they wouldn't lose their position in the world? I don't know, but those are questions we're going to get to at the bottom of.
Yep. And look, I thought it was very interesting that you had celebrities and Democrats. Hillary Clinton put out a tweet saying this is racist to talk about it being a Chinese virus or a Wuhan virus. And literally government communist apparatchiks from China were applauding and retweeting the quotes from Hillary Clinton to play their own propaganda deflection game. They are blaming us. They're blaming the U.S. military, which is a complete fabricated conspiracy theory. It is information warfare, and it seems like there's at least a segment of the woke public, especially in the press, who are so blinkered by their hatred of President Trump. And I don't like to talk like this, but I think it is true, where they are basically parroting the Chinese Communist Party propaganda line because it's a way to make Trump look insensitive.
Well, that's right. And I feel the same way as you. I don't like to attack people, but there are moments when you have to get outraged, and this is one. I mean, if I came out, you get celebrated when you come out and you say, boy, Russia did try to meddle in our election. I don't think they elected the president, but they tried. Yeah, good job. But, that's not racist against Russian Americans. It's called being a educated person or a member of Congress who is trying to do something with foreign policy that makes sense. And when you see a tweet from the WHO that says Chinese scientists said this is not transmittable person to person, and that was in January, and you know that misinformation happened, they have to be held accountable. Again, they look at this virus wrecking their country, and as communists, they don't care about individual lives, so they think maybe we don't say anything, let it fly around the world, because now everybody has to deal with it and not just us. I don't know that happened, but it is a question I have, and it's not an unrealistic one either.
And Congressman, I would also just point out, we got to go, but you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. We had, and this has sort of gone by the wayside because the news cycles have been so crazy and frenetic, but there was some sort of cyber attack on HHS in the middle of this from some foreign entity. That's something that we need to look into. I mean, there are other vulnerabilities that might be being exploited by people who mean us harm, and it's the job of the U.S. government, the U.S. military, and the intelligence community to make sure that they are still up and looking at those threats and not just turning totally inward at task number one, which is defeating the virus. No question about that. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, hope that you come out of this okay. I know you're in quarantine. Really appreciate your time, and we will watch your non-vote tomorrow, knowing that you support this legislation. Thank you, Congressman.
You bet. Take care.